In over a dozen cases that have been ruled as suspicious drownings, a smiley face has been found near the body. The smiley face killer has been somewhat of a theory for a while, from 1997 all the way up to 2017. 45 bodies of college-age males have been found in 11 states, all in bodies of water. And many of these cases are strikingly similar. While police have just ruled this off as an accidental drowning, New York City detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, both extremely credible sources with about 40 years of combined experience, have been working hard to solve these unsolved cases. They believe for many reasons that police have ignored obvious signs that we have a serial killer or a group of serial killers on our hands, and that they could be potentially responsible for up to 335 cases. All of the victims have been male, college-age, athletic, popular, and high on academic achievements, so they suspect that these murders may be out of jealousy. Almost all of the bodies found show signs of dying on land, and come back positive for a roofie drug. So why were these ruled as an accident? Let's look at the cases. Part 2 to the smiley face killer. So first, let's talk about the case of Patrick McNeil. On February 16th of 1997, Patrick was last seen with his friends at a bar called the Dapper Dog. This is located in Manhattan's Upper East Side. After throwing up in the bathroom, he told his friends he was leaving and would be taking the subway back. And after that, no one saw Patrick again, and his body was recovered floating next to the Brooklyn Pier in the East River, 50 days later and 12 miles from where he was last seen. After looking at CCTV footage, he can be seen stumbling down the street and last seen turning left onto 90th Street. However, it doesn't seem like he's alone. A van actually follows pretty closely behind him, and when he stops to throw up, they stop too. After a witness got a partial view of the plate, police still refused to look for it because they thought it would be too expensive, and just dismissed it as an accidental drowning, even though his autopsy death was classified as undetermined. His blood alcohol level did not seem consistent with the state that he was in. That's when Detective Gannon promised Patrick's parents that he would find their son's killer or killers. Part 3 to the smiley face killer. So why didn't Detective Gannon think that Patrick had drowned? Well, police ruled it this way because of an overconsumption of alcohol. However, his blood level of alcohol was not extremely high, which would not have been consistent with him throwing up. He was recovered on his back, which is unusual for a drowning. Blood lividity is the process in which the person's blood will stop moving after the person is deceased. For example, if you die on your side, your blood will pool to the side. And even though he was found on his back, the blood lividity was absent from his back, which is where it would be if he had died in that position. He had thermal injuries on both his hands and torso as if he had been burned, and strangulation markings on his neck. The most telling thing, though, is that his feet and hands did not present any skin slippage, which would have been consistent with having been submerged for 50 days. Nor was he bloated, which is found in a lot of drowning cases. In fact, the signs on his body would have been consistent with him being in the water for only 24 hours. Gannon's theory? He was stalked, abducted, held for an extended period of time, murdered, and then disposed of in the water. Part 4 to the smiley face killer. So now let's talk about the case of William Hurley. In October of 2009, he called his fiancée to come pick him up from a sporting event, letting her know that he was feeling really tired and that his phone was about to die, but gave her his location just in case. She came, and he was nowhere to be found. His body was found 6 days later in the Charles River in Boston, Massachusetts. This man was a Navy veteran. Similarly to Patrick, surveillance footage showed him stumbling. But again, when examining his body, his blood alcohol level was very low. So they decided to test for a roofie, and he came back positive with GHB, which would have explained the stumbling for both of them with such a low alcohol level. Not only this, but his phone was smashed nearby him. He had blunt force trauma to the head and eye socket and behind his left leg. But again, police said he must have slipped, hit his head, and accidentally drowned. It's so suspicious to me that the police are just writing it off as an accident, even though this man was literally in the Navy and able to communicate his location. And the case that comes after this is somehow more mysterious. Part 5 to the smiley face killer. So the next case that we're going to talk about is Dakota James, who was literally a swim team captain. On January 5th of just 2017, he goes out to a bar with some coworkers, leaves to go home, and then is never seen again. 40 days later, his body is found in the Ohio River near Neville Island. On CCTV, he wasn't stumbling at all, just looking at his phone, and then walks towards an alleyway. 10 miles from this area is where his body's found. However, to have gotten there on its own, it would have had to travel through a dam, but his body didn't have a single scratch or bruise on it, which would have been consistent for going through something like that. Not only this, but again, there was roofie in his system, and Gannon even said it looked like there was strangulation marks on his neck. According to the autopsy, there was not enough water in his lungs to prove that he had drowned. And even though he had been missing for 40 days, his body only had 3 days of decomposition. To add to the spookiness, 11 smiley faces were found spray painted close to the bridge where his body was found. And again, shockingly, this was ruled as an accidental drowning. Part 6 to the smiley face killer. So there are so many cases that have been theorized to be victims of the smiley face killer. Another was Todd Gieb, who went missing in July of 2005 and was found in Lake Michigan 21 days later. He was found vertical in the water like it looked like he was standing, and his body only showed 2.5 days of decomposition. In 2006, Christopher Jenkins is another case found in the Mississippi River. Tommy Booth is another. Lucas Holman, Brian Welzian. The list goes on and on. And I could probably make 50 TikToks on this thing. So why haven't these been treated as a serial killer case? Well, there was a report that came out in 2010 debunking the theory and gave about 18 reasons why the smiley face killer doesn't exist. A huge reason being that drowning is the third most common cause of death in the US for mostly men. So I guess it does happen often. Also, a graffiti smiley face is pretty common. Whether the smiley face killer exists or not, these cases shouldn't have just been dismissed as accidental drownings. However, there is a first-hand story from someone who believes that they were a potential victim of the smiley face killer. And I'll be posting that story on the middle Reels tab of my Instagram. Check it out. If you guys want to talk about the worst mom in the history of moms, let's talk about the case of Diane Downs, who literally attempted to murder all 3 of her children in order to get a man to fall in love with her. So what exactly creates a monster like this? Well, Diane was born August 7th of 1955 in Phoenix, Arizona. Most of her life, she was pretty well behaved, but she started to rebel against her parents around high school. She cut her hair, had a really edgy phase, and got super boy crazy. And she started to date guys, which was way outside of her strict family's rules. And she fell in love with a boy named Steve Downs. They were high school sweethearts, but the second that college hit, they ended up going separate ways. He joined the Navy, and she went to Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College. And while they said that they would stay faithful to each other, she immediately started to hook up with other guys when she got there, and was expelled for her promiscuous behavior, and had to go back and live with her strict parents. While Steve came back, he forgave her, and they ended up running away together and getting married on November 13th of 1973. They were known to fight constantly, but in 1974, they had their first child together, making everything worse. Part 2 to the Diane Downs case. Well, the marriage between her and Steve was beyond rocky, and having their first daughter together, Christy, did not help that improve. And 6 months after she was born, Diane ended up leaving Christy with her dad so she could join the Navy, which only lasted 3 weeks because she had to leave for severe blisters. They had another kid in 1976 named Cheryl, and Steve had a vasectomy immediately after this, but then Diane was pregnant again. So I guess you can imagine how that happened. She did not go through with the pregnancy, but her and Steve stayed together. Later, they moved to Mesa, Arizona, got new jobs, and Diane was having affairs with all of her new co-workers. Got pregnant again, kept this one, and had a boy named Danny. Steve actually still decided to stay for the sake of the kids, and wanted to remain a father figure to Danny. But eventually they ended up getting divorced in 1980. And this is when things got significantly more unstable. Diane started to bounce from relationship to relationship, moving in and out with different men, and then decided to become a surrogate in order to make money, even though she didn't pass all the psychiatric exams. Terrifying. But everything changed when she met a man named Nick. Part 3 to the Diane Downs case. So this is when Diane met Robert Nickenbacker, who went by the name Nick. And she swore that this man was the love of her life. He had separated from his wife and describes the relationship as being intense and overwhelming. He eventually broke it off with her though because he didn't like kids. And this is when Diane became devastated and angry at her own children for getting in the way of her love. Her kids and her moved to Cottage Grove, Oregon, but still couldn't seem to forget Nick. She would obsessively write to him, and she really stopped paying attention to her kids' health. They often went hungry, went without coats in the cold. It was even said by a neighbor that Cheryl had mentioned that she was scared of her mom. Well, on Thursday, May 19th of 1983, everything went down. This story is from her perspective, by the way. They were coming home from a friend's house whenever Diane decided to take the kids on a scenic route. They did this often to explore. Hungry Like the Wolf started to play on the radio, and this is when she noticed a bushy-haired stranger signaling her over from the middle of the road. And at 10 p.m., with her kids asleep in the back of the car, she got out to talk to him, and he immediately demanded for her keys. Part 4 to the Diane Downs case. So immediately after this stranger demanded for her keys, they had some sort of a struggle, in which he shoots all 3 of her kids and then shoots her in the left arm. In order to distract him, she pretends to throw her keys in the bush, and then uses the keys that are actually in her hand to turn on the car and then drive wildly like a lunatic to the hospital. So she pulls up to this hospital with her kids in bad condition, and all of the medical professionals that were there that night were shocked by her reactions. Her daughter Cheryl ended up passing away, and Danny and Christy were literally clinging to life. And she showed no emotion at all. Not only had she wrapped her own gun wound and not her kids', but she was worried about her new car having blood on it. She seemed relieved that Cheryl was dead, and was shocked when she found out that Danny, her 3-year-old child, had been paralyzed. And she was only shocked because he wasn't hit in the heart. Christy had had a stroke, but she was still alive, so currently Diane was the only witness. And a lot of moms actually felt for her during this time, and were even scared to leave with this man on the loose. But the public opinion didn't last for long. Part 5 to the Diane Downs case. Even though the police were already suspicious of Diane, because she was the only witness, they had to rule out her story. So they got a composite sketch of the guy and they ended up searching the whole area, where they only found some bullet casings. And her interviews during this time, if you guys have ever seen them, are so weird, definitely worth watching. This woman was eating up the attention so much, and she made the story into this whole overcoming thing where like she battled the patriarchy, ended up actually getting away from this man, like she's kind of the hero in the situation, but didn't show any emotion towards her kids. She went on the Oprah show and would crack jokes and have the crowd laughing. So the police ended up asking her to do a reenactment of this event. And it's truly one of the weirdest videos that you will ever see because she seems like she's having fun. Any mom being put through this would have found this to be extremely traumatic to relive this event. Instead, she's having fun, smirking, checking herself out in the car mirror, ends up hitting her arm on the steering wheel and says, "That almost hurt as bad as when," and cuts herself off. And it seems like she was about to say, "as when I shot myself." Part 6 to the Diane Downs case. So after seeing this horrific reenactment, people just flat out are not believing her anymore, especially whenever she said this whole thing took place in like 5 to 10 seconds. And she did not take the criticism very well, literally stating, "If I had shot my own children, wouldn't I have done a good job of it?" She's literally gaslighting people who are letting her know that things aren't adding up. Back at the hospital, Christy is starting to improve a lot, but she's still nonverbal. Her mom ends up coming to visit her actually, and her heart spikes. So the police are starting to want to have her as a witness, and they immediately get her in with a therapist. They practice by her writing down the shooter on a piece of paper and her throwing it into a fire, until eventually she feels safe enough to give it to the therapist. And once she did, it said her mom. The police went to go check Diane's house, found bullet casings that matched those at the crime scene, and also found a diary with intros about Robert, and talking about how Robert doesn't want kids. So then the police had their motive. Which Oprah even brought up to her that the man was now afraid of her because he thought she had shot her own kids. She tried to change her story a few more times, but she ended up getting arrested. Part 7 to the Diane Downs case. So by the time it was time for her trial, she was pregnant again. She said she did it because she missed her kids and was lonely. But honestly, I feel like she did it just because she thought her sentence wouldn't be as bad. They ended up playing the song "Hungry Like the Wolf" in the courtroom, and Diane was jamming out to it. They showed the tapes, and she showed no emotion. They even did a doll reenactment for the jury to paint a picture. And then Christy testified, saying that her mom had actually stopped the car when she thought they were all asleep, went to the trunk, came around, and ended up shooting them. Cheryl first, Danny second, and her last. Wrapped herself in a towel and proceeded to drive slowly to the hospital. So ultimately, Diane was found guilty. And to this day, she is still in complete denial, thinking that she is still innocent. She ended up having the baby girl in jail, and she was immediately taken from her. This daughter was adopted, and Danny and Christy were actually adopted by one of the prosecutors on the case. Overall, it was a pretty happy ending. But Diane actually successfully broke out of jail for a little bit. If you want to hear that story, come over to my Instagram. It'll be on my middle reels tab.